All right. And we are live. So, welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's college football with Sam using StreamYard for the first time because, well, we have 4 people on instead of the usual one. So, welcome in Bald Father Betts, who I've had on the channel before to discuss multiple things about college football. I've collaborated with John before on the Big Ten Huddle, and I also had Mike on before to give a preview of the college football season. He has his own preview magazine. So, a lot of intelligent people, a lot of wonderful people who I've been blessed with to have different connections and interactions with. And I want to do this weekly at Wednesdays, planning on it, letting you all know that at 8 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday from here on out, give or take, we're going to be doing this where I'm going to try and have more than just one guest to talk about the biggest games of the week. So without further ado, I think it is most appropriate to look at Texas and Ohio State. Ohio State's about a 2.5-point favorite, and it seems as if everyone in the analyst space, at least that I know of, who has a big channel, especially the channels that are bigger than mine, they're all picking Texas, and they all seem pretty comfortable with it. So we're going to start off with that and have a little bit of back and forth debate here. Let's start off with you, Bald Father Betts, going in alphabetical order. Give us your thoughts on the game for a few minutes.
Yeah, so as you know, I always come at it from the line, from the betting angle, so we'll start there. So line, when it originally got open, essentially to only professional bettors, came out at Ohio State -4.5. So I think that shows you a little bit the disconnect that the books initially had with what the public sentiment is. Then when it was released to the public, it was Ohio State -4. So we grabbed Texas plus the 4 right then because I had a pretty strong indication that it would come down. And now you're looking at it anywhere between 1.5, 2, and 2.5. Quite honestly, with the line at where it is right now, I would lean Ohio State with this. I would much prefer Ohio State -1 than Ohio State -1.5. I think Ohio State will end up winning the game by 1 to 4 points. I think it's going to be a very sloppy game. I think it's going to be a very defensive game. I think there's not going to be a whole lot of sustained offensive drives really either way. I think Ohio State will have the edge in explosive plays, mainly because of the talent that they have on the outside. And then the keys, I think, for the game to each when Ohio State's on offense, when Texas is on offense. So when Ohio State's on offense, I think the main key is going to be, can Texas contain their run game with a light box? So Texas was able to play a light box and play a 2-high safety, essentially a 2-high safety shell the entire game in the Cotton Bowl last year, and they did a decent job at containing Ohio State's rushing attack. Most Texas people are just kind of assuming they're going to be able to do that again, but Texas is replacing the entire interior defensive line, so I don't think you can just check that. You need to see it first. And then on the other side, when Texas has the ball and Ohio State is on defense, is Texas able to get anything generated on the rush outside of outside zone? Because Ohio State schematically takes away outside zone rush. They do it as good or better than anyone. Last year they were the #1 defense against outside zone, and that's Sark's bread and butter. So he essentially invented a version of outside boundary zone when he was with the Falcons, and then brought that back to college when he came back. And that's essentially Texas's bread and butter on the run game. And they haven't had a whole lot of success running inside. And I don't think those things just change overnight. I think they're kind of built into the schematics. So that's how I see the most important things on each side.
Your thoughts, John?
I was going to say, that's really good stuff. I really appreciate looking at it from Stark's angle, his point of view with what's worked and what's not worked, and really talking about the rushing attack. I think the rushing attack is going to be absolutely key in this game. But the big word in this one, whether it's players or coaches, that everybody seems to be going to is experience. And I hear everybody talking about the experience of Ohio State's defense. I hear everybody talking about the experience of Texas's offense. And don't get me wrong, those are big things too. and the coordinators as well, right? Ohio State bringing in Matt Patricia, Brian Hartline, and technically his third season as offensive coordinator. However, really wasn't calling plays his first season. Last season, he was probably the co-offensive coordinator. Really wasn't the main guy like Chip Kelly was. So this is really his first season being the full-on offensive coordinator. We're going to see what that's like. Gives me a little bit of confidence because I do think that they're going to go to Jeremiah Smith more with Brian Hartline as the guy. I think they went a little bit they didn't go to him enough at times last year. Look at the Michigan game as being one of those prime examples in my opinion. But I actually think the biggest thing to look at here with experience, and I give Ohio State the edge, is the center position. I think the new starting center for Texas is going to be a huge question mark, and then the center position for Ohio State, Carson Hinsman, him being the new guy, or not the new guy, he's been playing center for 2 years now as well, and so it's really going to be a lot of communication among the offensive linemen and trying to get those guys set up, because both teams are going to come at the quarterback and try to get pressure on both these guys, and they're going to try to limit the big plays by doing that. If the centers on both sides of the ball can help out those new quarterbacks, obviously, Carson Hinsman, like I said, has some experience, but the Texas center, Cole Hudson, he's also a senior. He's just never played center before. So what's that going to look like? I'm really interested to see what that looks like early in the game, but I totally agree with Baldfather Betts. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game, a lot of defense in this one. I said it on my channel, and I'll say it again. I would be surprised, unless there's a pick six, I'd be surprised if either team goes over 21 points in this one.
Mike, your thoughts?
John touched a little bit on some of it. For me, the biggest storyline is some of the newness. Both coordinators for Ohio State in Hartline and Matt Patricia, new quarterback in Julian Sayin. Will Howard was the consummate leader. And even though his arm talent is not as good as Julian Sayin's was, he was a guy who just, you believed in him in the huddle. Ryan Day has said this week a couple of times, said it yesterday and today, they're seeing Julian taking a little more command in the huddle. And it's helpful for him that he has veterans on the offensive line. They lost some guys with Donovan Jackson going to the NFL, Josh Fryer, but they have a lot of guys back. Carson Hinsman has been mentioned. Luke Montgomery is a guy that I am pretty high on at one of the guard spots. Austin Sierreveld has really done a mammoth transformation. He actually thought he was going to play guard his entire career. He's kicking out to left tackle, and he played a lot last year. Tigre Tishabola played a lot last year. So they don't have a ton of established depth, but I think their starters are really good. The thing I am concerned about is with the offensive line, is there going to be a lot of help? Because Colin Simmons off the edge is just an absolute beast. Anthony Hill Jr. is also maybe the best linebacker in college football. You're going to have four of the top 6 or 7 guys in college football in this game, in Jeremiah Smith, Caleb Downs, Anthony Hill, and Colin Simmons. And to see that on one field in one game this early in the season, I think is really something. But I think that Texas will lean on its experience. Ohio State will lean more on its coaches. Ease Julian Sayin in just a little bit, and then by the middle of the first quarter, maybe end of the first quarter, they'll start letting him rip, because I don't think they're going to go crazy with the pass early on.
So how I look at this game is really through the view of which team can create a fluke play against the defense the easiest. I think that both defenses have a wonderful matchup edge against both offenses. I think that Ohio State's defensive ends against Texas's tackles could be an absolute nightmare. Arch Manning is obviously a very talented quarterback, but he didn't handle pressure the best last year. There's a reason that Steve Sarkisian didn't start him over Quinn Ewers, even though I think it's pretty obvious that Manning has a higher ceiling than Ewers. Ewers had an experienced command of the Texas offense, and Manning created a lot of his own pressures, a lot of them. So having that combined with an inexperienced offensive line could create some havoc in favor for Ohio State. You look on the other side with Texas's defense against this Ohio State offensive line. I have grown to like the Ohio State offensive line a little bit more than earlier, but I still think that compared to this Texas D line, which has a lot of incoming transfers, yes, but proven commodities in Murad Watson, big bodies in Travis Shaw, a huge guy, and also proven in Cole Brevard, and then Simmons is a freak. They were confident enough in their defensive end depth to put, or defensive end edge, whatever you want to call it, to put Trey Moore at linebacker. So I think that Texas's front seven is going to eat Ohio State's front alive. Could be wrong there. But what Ohio State has that I think Texas doesn't is the two players on the field who can score the quickest. That being Caleb Downs lurking and getting a pick six, or maybe forcing a fumble that no one sees coming, or Jeremiah Smith, either whether he gets in space or maybe he has a possession catch or just creates a big play. I think that Ohio State can more easily do that than Texas if what I think about both rosters and staffs and how Texas will deal with the shoe are somewhat within range. I lean Ohio State consequentially to win because I think that they can score touchdowns more easily. I have a hard time seeing either team successfully run against either defense. I'd have an easier time seeing Texas run than Ohio State, but I have a much easier time seeing Ohio State have a passing touchdown in their, pulling that out of the back of their out of their back pocket rather than Texas doing that same thing. The shoe is going to play a massive part in this game too. I know it's at noon. I think we'd all prefer it to be at night. From the college football standpoint, if you're a Texas fan, you want it to be at noon, just so your team has a better chance of winning. But that new offensive line in that crowd against that front, it's going to be interesting to see how they operate. Bald Father Bets, if you have any rebuttals, please bring them forward.
No, just to touch on some, like what everyone said, to touch on some of the points that you guys talked about. So the first thing is game in the shoe. Texas had one of the most experienced offensive lines in the country, and on the first drive against Michigan last year, they still had 2 false starts. I very much so expect sloppy play from the offensive line in terms of penalties. Is that game is early on in the shoe, and that would be an opposite from the way the Cotton Bowl went last year. Ohio State was more penalized than Texas was last year. It's one of the things that kept Texas in the game, even though Ohio State was more talented. When you look at the newness, again, mainly talking about the coordinators on Ohio State, because that's scheme stuff, which I think is really actually more important than individual players when you're looking at the talent composite that Texas and Ohio State have. They have talent everywhere. From a scheme side, with Ohio State on defense, I know Patricia likes the 3-4 and the 4-3. I know 3-4 is his bread and butter. It's what he really wants because he wants the defensive line to eat up blocks for the linebackers. But he would be crazy to come out of the 4-2-5 with Caleb Downs. So the 4-2-5 with Caleb Downs is so unique because essentially you can turn it into a 4-3-4 anytime you want because Caleb Downs can essentially come down and play linebacker. Or you can turn it into a traditional 4-2-5 with the 3 high safety, where you're essentially playing an inverted Tampa 2, where instead of the middle linebacker dropping back, it's Caleb Downs playing a rover in the middle, or Caleb Downs can come play nickel, and then you're in nickel defense right away because he's covering the slot receiver. So Patricia, I think, would be out of his mind to come out of a 4-2-5. With Hartline, I agree a lot with what John said. I think you're going to see them test the outside a little bit more than maybe Chip Kelly did early on in the year. As the year went on, obviously, they tested the outside more with Smith. But I think you'll see that happen more. And again, I'm with you in that I don't think Texas holds him to 1 catch for 3 yards this game. I think Hartline will not let that happen to his star wide receiver. So with all that essentially being said, then I see the only neutralizer for Texas is 2 things. You touched on it. The pass rush side from Texas, the pass rush truly could overwhelm Ohio State if the offensive line struggles. I tend to think schematically they're going to have Sayin on 3-step drops, and they're going to have rolling pockets, and they're not going to have a freshman making his first start just stepping back into 5-step and 7-step drops and getting crushed by Colin Simmons. So I think they will schematically get out of that the best they can. And then obviously Arch Manning on the side of Texas. If Arch Manning is what the world and like Paul Feinbaum says he is, then Texas is going to win the national championship. Arch Manning is going to win the Heisman, and they're going to be one of the greatest teams to ever touch the field. I tend to think that it's probably somewhere in the middle. Arch Manning probably isn't going to be the greatest thing to ever touch a football game one, and he probably is pretty good. So he could be an equalizer, especially if he breaks off a zone read run for 40 yards, anything like that.
Well, Lord help us all if Paul Feinbaum is exactly right on everything in college football. We'll never hear the end of it, I don't think. So I'm praying that doesn't happen more than anything. But I like what you said there about the offensive line penalties, and I'm really curious to see what happens this season with Ohio State penalty-wise, because it wasn't so much an issue with their penalties throughout the year, although they did have those issues in that Texas game. They were the team that saw the least amount of penalties against them last season. I believe it was 3.7 penalties per game, which was just, it was kind of a crazy thing. I don't think they had a holding called on them in the entire regular season. I think eventually one came in the playoffs. I forget exactly when it was, but it was just kind of astounding the way all that worked out. But I mean, at the end of the day, you have to play through that stuff. You have to get through it. I don't think there's any actual, anything actually going on with that. I think it was probably just a little bit of a fluke thing, and, teams may have just been playing more disciplined football against them, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, we'll see what happens all there. But I do think that Max Clare is going to be a huge piece of this game as well. I think that Ohio State does a really good job when they go against really, really good, elite pass rushers. You saw it a little bit against Abdul Carter last year. That was the first game where their All-American guard, Donovan Jackson, started at left tackle. And although he didn't do the best job in the world at blocking Abdul Carter, that was honestly probably one of his worst games as a tackle. They did an excellent job at getting Will Howard away from Abdul Carter, rolling him out, stuff like that, and then also chipping Abdul Carter, because Penn State was pretty, at least from what I saw, they were pretty, you kind of knew what they were going to do with Abdul Carter most times. It didn't really look like they were going to do anything different. That's going to be a huge piece for Texas. Can they put Colin Simmons in different situations so that way Ohio State can't game plan against them? They have to switch things up at the line. You get Julian saying confused. And then also, we're talking a lot about Caleb Downs. And don't get me wrong, I love Caleb Downs, and everything you said about Caleb Downs is correct. He's so versatile. He changes your defense. He does so much for you. But Michael Taft is a really, really good safety as well. And what he's going to be able to do against these Ohio State tight ends could be a large dictation of what happens in this game. If he's able to take those guys away, if they're able to still have, one or two guys on Jeremiah Smith, it's going to be huge. But ultimately, this is probably the most important part of the game. Can you cover all of Ohio State's pass catchers? And if you can't, can Julian Sayin have enough time to deliver the ball to him?
Yeah, I think that Max Clare is going to be very important. Probably one of the only players that Purdue had that a lot of people wanted. Obviously, he is a big weapon getting down the seam. I think you'll actually see Ohio State early anyway. I'm sure that they'll go away from this as the defensive looks change. I think you might see them lining up in 12 personnel pretty early. Will Kaczmarek is a really good blocker. He could help with Colin Simmons. If they move Colin Simmons around, you throw Kaczmarek to the side that he's on, give Julian Sayin a little more time to throw. I think that as far as feeding Jeremiah Smith, I don't think they're going to force it in. I mean, we saw that Michigan bracketed him, Texas bracketed him, and they didn't force it into him because they had Emeka Ibuka. They had Carnell Tate. They had all these other weapons. I think they're going to try to get Smith the ball early on just short things like bubble screens, quick outs, and that way it might bring the defensive backs up a little bit. Then, of course, he can get by him. But again, you've got Tate now as the number 2. Brandon Inniss has worked and waited his turn. He's a guy who you're going to, I think, hear from. Mylan Graham, Quincy Porter. They've got so many guys that I think that Pete Kwiatkowski is going to have his hands full figuring out where are we going to allot our defense. Are we just going to kind of bubble everything and keep everything in front of us? Are we going to take some chances with some man? I don't think that would be a great idea. But it's going to be very interesting to see kind of the chess game they play. And Matt Patricia he's not going to be as aggressive as Jim Knowles was. Obviously, he will be more multiple with the 3-4, with the 4-3. But I think Baldfather made a good point. Caleb Downs is such a chess piece. He can be a hybrid. He can be a nickel. He can be a traditional safety. And that's where a lot of the eyes on the offense are going to be. They're going to see where he lines up, and that's going to dictate the play call. But even then, at the snap, he's got enough speed and quickness and knows angles well enough that he could blow the play up. So I just think the chess match between the coordinators is going to be really, really interesting. And I think it's going to be, you might even see a scoreless first quarter just because they're going to be trading blows, feeling each other out, and then they'll settle in.
Scoreless first quarter. I like it. I love it. Yeah, not saying that it's definite, but I think this game has a better chance of looking like a Big Ten West game than 2019 LSU Alabama for sure.
Yeah.
I think that what's been talked about so much in this game is, quarterback and Arch Manning versus Julian Sayin, and I get that. I myself think Manning is going to be better for the whole season and in this game. But what I like that we're all touching on here is that Ohio State has these other advantages and other X factors, really, that many people aren't talking about. And I don't get why. I mean, they have the two best players in football, and yet I'm hearing far more about a quarterback who I expect to be really good, but who hasn't started against a opponent that is this big and grandiose and in this type of environment. And I think that is why, as someone who said before, time and time again, that I think Texas should win, I don't think the team that should win is going to win here. And another nugget of information that I stumbled upon the other day is that Ryan Day has 14 career wins against FPI top 10 opponents. So how they finished at the end of the year. Sarkisian at Texas since 2021. And I know that, 2021's his first year. So I probably wouldn't even count that too much because he had to rebuild the whole team. Really impressive job. He only has one, and that came against 2023 Alabama on the road. And we'll have to see. I mean, the only commonality between those two teams is that both had Caleb Downs, and Caleb Downs was awesome on those teams. So I'm excited to see how this one pans out, particularly if I'm right about Ohio State's offensive line versus Texas's defensive line and vice versa, because there's so much unknown with both of these teams that I almost think any result is possible, not equally likely, but Ohio State could come out and they could blitz Texas, or Texas could establish control pretty quickly on the wrestling match and pin them, or it could be extremely back and forth. Maybe it even comes down to special teams. Texas is a new kicker from the portal. Technically, Ohio State does too, although they're starting Jaden Fielding. So I'm really excited for this one. Noon game, Eastern time, obviously. Any final thoughts that we have from anyone? And if not, we can all quickly go around and just say who we think is going to win and then move on.
Yeah, I'll start final thought, and then I'll give my I already gave my prediction, but I'll touch on it a little bit more. So final thought, one of the big things in this, if I recently watched I watched it a bunch of times. So I watched the Ohio State Texas Cotton Bowl again a couple days ago, and one of the things that really stood out to me it stood out more and more every single time I watched the game. Some of the throws that Will Howard made, Julian Sayin is not even going to attempt those throws. Those are 4 or 5 year starting quarterback type senior throws. He's throwing into a window of 3 Texas defenders that he realizes a Ohio State wide receiver will come open for a fraction of a time period of like 1 to 2 seconds. And so I think then you're going to see some of the passing concepts from Ohio State and Heartline be a little bit more simple because of exactly that. Then on the other side with Quinn and what he was able to do with Texas in terms of pre-snap, like reads, getting the team in the right formation, getting the blocking protection correct. The famous one's the Arizona State 4th and 13 play where he checked the blocking protection and then they hit Matthew Golden. I don't think you're going to see that immediately from Arch. So I also think that the pre-snap concept outside of the motion that Sark likes to have is also going to be much more simple. And that leads to defense dominating early, which I agree that I think I could see 0-0 first quarter. I think you could see 6-3 halftime. And then ultimately, I think this is a 23-20, 24-23, 24-20, 2017 type game. I lean with Ohio State winning, like I said, somewhere between 1 and 4 points. A lot of it, I think, just has to do too with Ohio State really does not lose games in the shoe. When they have lost games, there's been very specific matchup advantages that got them, and there isn't. You could make the argument that Texas has a better roster, which is what I think a lot of the analysts and all the public who's in love with Texas in this game is doing. But Texas doesn't have a specific matchup advantage that they can exploit. They have some talent. We haven't mentioned Ryan Wingo once in this, and he's worth mentioning. I think Jack Endries is worth mentioning. C.J. Baxter, who's supposedly going to be healthy for this, worth mentioning. But they don't have a schematic advantage really anywhere, and that's the only thing that has gotten Ohio State when they've been in the shoe. Is a schematic advantage that kind of exploits something that they do. So with that, I think it'll be very close. It would not surprise me at all if Texas won, but I think Ohio State wins a very ugly, very sloppy, low-scoring game by 1 to 4 points.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that you're going to see a lot of kind of what you saw with Notre Dame a few years ago when they came to the shoe in that very first one. That was a high-powered offense for Ohio State. C.J. Stroud was coming back for his second year. Everybody was thinking, oh, okay, Ohio State's going to go out and put up a bunch of points out here, but I just think you're going to see much better defensive play from Ohio State. In that one, you saw worse offensive play by Notre Dame that held them back. In this one, you're going to see good offensive play from Texas. Like Baldfather said, they got Ryan Wingo, Wisner, C.J. Baxter. It is a young offensive line, but Texas takes care of their offensive linemen. They don't have guys waiting in the wings that are not ready to play because they get those guys ready quickly. They have one of the best offensive line coaches in the country there. So this whole thing is going to be really, really big on who takes the opportunity when it's there. There's going to be an opportunity for one of these two teams, whether it's going for it on fourth down, whether it's a certain matchup and a certain play or something like that. I'm curious to see how Ohio State moves Jeremiah Smith around on the perimeter. He talked a lot about how much more of a grasp he has of the playbook this season. So with a better grasp of the playbook, could they do some different things to try and get him the ball more intentionally like we talked about earlier? Ultimately, I think that Ohio State playing at home gives them the advantage in this one. I'm not totally sold that Ohio State wins. However, I'd probably go 55-45. I have Ohio State winning this one 17-13.
I think we're all going to be unanimous in kind of the low scoring thing. I think that when it comes down to it, this is for a big game. This is about as even as I've seen in a long time. Sam touched on it. It could be 15 different scenarios, and none of them would be surprising. You've got two quarterbacks who both came in with a lot of kudos. Both have talent. Neither has really played all that much. Both teams are overflowing with talent. I think in the end, the only thing that concerns me is that Brian Hartline has done this before. Now, I know that he's wiser. That was 3 years ago, that it didn't really work, and Ryan Day kind of assumed play calling again. And Brian has been able to kind of watch and learn. So he knows a few more things. But I do worry that because he's a receivers coach, that maybe he's going to go a little bit happy with the multiple receiver sets, maybe try to start chucking it around a little bit. And that's going to leave the offensive line just with no help. And you're going to have five, and you're going to have Trey Moore, you're going to have Colin Simmons, you're going to have Anthony Hill on a blitz. I just think that Texas has a few more guys who have been in situations before who are not going to be kind of overwhelmed by the moment. I'm not sure Sayan will be overwhelmed, but his head might be on a little bit of a swivel saying, okay, this is what it's like to be the starting quarterback at Ohio State. Arch has been in games. When it all comes down to it, I'm saying 24-21, and I'm saying the visiting team because in the 2 regular season meetings in this series, the home team has never won.
Yes, that's a very fun nugget. 2006, Ohio State beats Texas on the road. They play in the title game back when it was much harder to get selected for the title game. It's probably harder to reach it now that you have to go through the gauntlet of the 12-team playoff. And then 2005, Vince Young goes up to a really talented Jim Tressel team and beats them. I think I'm going to go with 14-13 for the sake of it, of being low scoring as realistically possible. 14-13, Ohio State. I said in my preview video that I think Texas leads for much of the game. I think that they look better. I think that they outgain Ohio State in yards and probably control the clock. But I think that in the same way, I'm going to harken back to a recent Big Ten West game, one of the last of its kind, that Nebraska led Minnesota for the entire game in 2023. All Kaliakmanis had to do was hit one receiver, Daniel Jackson, in the end zone, and that was the play that was really the straw that broke the camel's back. I think that Sayin has enough talent and Jeremiah Smith is good enough to where even if the throw is off or even if Sayin's having a really bad day, I think Ohio State needs just a few plays, if not maybe one play here, to really take the lead in a way that I think Texas would need several more plays to respond. I think that Texas is the type of team in this game to more easily put together sustainable drives, but because of the talent Ohio State has on the outside and how their receivers have a much better matchup edge against Texas's DBs than the Texas receivers and tight ends, Wingo. I know Emmett Mosley's out, but Wingo and then DeAndre Moore Jr. against Ohio State's corners and safeties is not the same matchup edge. So I think Ohio State can score quicker and they can respond at a faster pace. That's why I'm going with Ohio State here. Moving on to LSU and Clemson. I clicked on the Notre Dame Miami tab. I'm more excited for that game personally, but we have to go in order here. LSU traveling to Clemson. Clemson is a 3.5 point favorite. I think at some places maybe a 4.5 point favorite. It is a night game, as Ohio State and Texas should be, but sadly isn't. What are your thoughts on this? First, Baldfather bets.
Yeah, so again, line came out initially at Clemson -3. It really hung out at Clemson -3 for a long time. It wasn't like Ohio State, Texas, where it immediately got bet down. And then since then, it went to 3.5, long time at 3.5, and now you've seen 4 and even 4.5 touched. There's been some buyback once it hit 4 and 4.5. We're on LSU plus the 4 is what we gave it out at when we grabbed it. I think you're going to see the exact opposite type of game as what you saw in Ohio State, Texas. I think Ohio State, Texas is going to be built up as the game of the weekend. I think it's going to be a great competitive game, but I don't think it's going to be a great game to watch. I think this is the game that's going to be a great game to watch. I am not convinced that the schematic issues that the two defenses had will be fixed in game one. I think they'll be significantly better. I think both defenses will be significantly better. I think Clemson has potentially the best defensive line, not front seven. I think Texas has the best front seven, but I think they potentially have the best defensive line in college football. I'm concerned about LSU's offensive line against that. I think you're going to know very early on whether or not, LSU came to play. The offensive line can establish itself. They just need to make it a neutral factor. There's no way that LSU's offensive line in game one going up against that defensive line will be a strength, but they need to just not let it completely beat them. I do think that they will have the ability to do that. And then from that, I think you're going to see fireworks. I think you're going to see Nussmeier go off with that group of wide receivers. I think you're going to see Cade go off with that group of wide receivers that he has on the Clemson side. I think you're looking at two quarterbacks who are absolutely vying for round one, pick one in the upcoming draft, really along with Drew Aller. And I think it's going to be a very, very fun game. I took LSU plus the 4 simply because 4 is a very, very key number in college football betting. Wish I would have waited and got the 4.5, but that's okay. I think everybody's kind of counting LSU out and just assuming that they're dead and that Brian Kelly won't win the first game and all these things. And if you take a long time and actually study the rosters and look at the talent on each, LSU, you could make an argument, has a top to bottom more talented roster than Clemson does. I think Clemson has more key stars. I think Clemson will have probably the most first round draft picks in the upcoming draft. So I think that they have some key components that could ultimately prove to be the deciding factor in what will be a very close, high scoring, fun game for the fans to watch.
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on at the line of scrimmage here in this game. Obviously, like Baldfather talked about, with Clemson, one of the best, if not the best, defensive lines in college football. For them, I think LSU obviously trying to replace some players on the offensive line. If this was last year, I'd feel a lot more confident in Clemson, but because of the little bit more youth on their offensive line and stuff, I do lead in the trenches here, at least in the defensive line for Clemson and the LSU's offensive line. I obviously lean Clemson here, and I think that's going to be a huge factor with Garrett Nussmeier, with how much he struggled with interceptions last year. I think Clemson has, obviously, Cade Klubnik is a star. He's a playmaker, but they don't necessarily have a playmaking star running back or a playmaking star wide receiver. So we're going to see what kind of stuff Cade Klubnik can do there, but I think the key factor here is the Blake Baker versus Garrett Riley combination of them going at one another. Garrett Riley, known for explosive plays, he's going to do a lot. He's going to get Cade Klubnik running and outside the pocket and things like that. But Blake Baker, he struggles with a quarterback who can be on the run. He struggles with high explosive plays. It's a very high risk, high reward defense, and if it works out for him, LSU is going to do a really good job of stopping Clemson in this one. But when you are that high risk and high reward with your blitzing, your aggression, and everything else, it can come back to bite you. And I think more often than not, against a really good coordinator like Garrett Riley, I think that's probably going to come back to bite LSU in this one. But it's going to take a huge effort from Clemson from LSU's defense to stop Clemson in this one. In my mind, I agree. I think both defenses will be better than what we saw last year, but I think both of these teams, they just have really good offenses, and you're going to see a whole lot of big plays and. Like Baldfather said, this is going to be much more fun game to watch, much more high scoring, things like that, and I'm excited to watch this one for sure.
Yeah, this one will have all the bells and whistles. You'll see big plays. You'll certainly. I just love the storyline. You've got the Tigers against the Tigers, the battle for Death Valley. Who's really Death Valley? And so you know that you're going to hear that. For me, it comes down to, I agree, both offenses have the ability to put up points. I'm more confident in Tom Allen than I am in Blake Baker. As John said, Blake Baker has problems with certain kinds of schemes, and Cade Klubnik is nifty enough with his legs that while he's not going to run a ton by design, he extends plays, he can get out on the edge, he can take off. And as much as I loved Harold Perkins as a freshman, I know he's been injured, but he's regressed. And in coverage, he is a liability. And I think against Clemson's receiving core, Antonio Williams, Bryant Wesco, TJ Moore, all the guys they have, I think that is going to end up being a problem. And Tom Allen, basically, I think what you're going to see from Clemson is what you saw a lot last year schematically from Penn State. And I think that those guys are going to be mad that they were so easy to run on. I think they averaged 5 yards a game, 5 yards a carry allowed, and that's very un-Clemson-like. And I think you're going to see Peter Woods stuffing the inside. I think you're going to see TJ Parker coming off the edge and making problems for Garrett Nussmeier. I like LSU's receivers. I don't love them. I like them. I like the fact that neither team has a proven star at running back. That is a little bit intriguing to me, but they may just be thrown all over the yard, and the running backs may just be window dressing. So to me, I'm just a little more confident in Tom Allen than I am in Blake Baker. But I agree. I think it's going to be just a bang-up game and probably will end up being the more talked about game of the big game weekend.
For sure. I know that there was someone on Twitter, I think part of it was due to the thought of the offensive fireworks, saying that the winner of LSU Clemson will actually be ranked number 1 after the weekend, not Ohio State, Texas. Of course, that won't happen. That's not how the polls work.
No.
But that was mentioned, and I thought that was pretty funny because I think that there's a world where Clemson is able to come out and really control this and make some people think of them as the number 1 team. I don't see a world where LSU exactly dominates in the way that I could see Clemson, but I think an interesting thing to think about is that LSU has an experienced running back in Caden Durham,
Mhm.
and Josh Thompson's probably a better guard than anyone Clemson has, and Brycen Moore could be a comparable center to Linthicum. So while that may not turn up to be something that's that impactful in a game full of fireworks, I wonder with Clemson and how Garrett Riley sometimes gets a little too cute, and how this offense for Clemson has really, last year they hung 66 points on App State, most of them coming in the first half. They did nothing against Georgia. Louisville kicked their rear. South Carolina held them down, kind of waterboarded them, honestly, held them to 14 points. They showed some things against Texas that I really loved, but also Texas was ahead by 3 scores at halftime. So tying that in with LSU also failing in big games, not winning an opener means that someone here is going to have to step up, and someone is going to have to earn their first big win, first, marquee win in quite some time. And I trust Allen more than Baker. I trust Garrett Riley more than is it Cortez Hankton, who's their OC at LSU? I forget his name.
I think so.
Okay, thanks. However, having a good interior line and having that running back, I think can maybe help LSU if Clemson's really struggling for whatever reason against that LSU front. And they got Whit Weeks. They brought in Jack Pyburn and Patrick Payton from Florida State in Florida. So if they pan out well, that plus a really good linebacker, they got Tamarcus Cooley, AJ Halsey. They made a lot of portal hauls that I really love. And if LSU can bring that together on defense and have like an actual SEC defense, and they can find a way to run for maybe 3 yards per carry or 4 yards per carry, thinking that maybe Allen hasn't fixed everything yet in week 1, I think LSU and their path to victory is they hang around and then they steal it at the end. As for Clemson, I think there's more pathways for them to win, but I'm going to save my pick after you all make your pick. So what do you think? Starting again with both father bets.
Yeah, and one thing there was a consensus there that we all you guys all like Tom Allen more than Baker, and I agree with you in terms of a individual coordinator versus coordinator. But there's one thing that I am huge on, and Sam knows this. I am obsessed with coordinator changes in year 2. So they love a coordinator change year 1, and it's like the sexiest, it's the new thing. They love it. It's super exciting. And I think a lot of people then kind of forget about them in year 2. But year 2 coordinator changes is where you actually see the biggest difference. So I agree that if I'm putting Tom Allen next to Baker and I'm looking at who would I pick, I would pick Allen. But Baker has a year head start advantage in terms of actually trying to make changes with the LSU defense. And in that regard, I give Baker a little bit of a slight advantage there. In terms of then the game, I think a lot of it's going to come down to, does Nussmeier have time to throw? And then if he has time to throw, that'll limit interceptions. If he's constantly pressured, Nussmeier's a statue. There's very few statues in modern college football who end up being successful unless they have just a complete pocket protecting them around them, and they have 5 NFL offensive linemen. So we're going to see on that. With that, I again lean with Clemson to win the game, something very, very close, high scoring late, like a 31-28, 38-35. If it were to get away from one team, I think it would get away from LSU. And that's the only way I think one of these teams comes out and would be ranked number one in the AP poll. Something that happens, I think, early on with polls is sometimes one team early on will dominate another team that's ranked high, but maybe shouldn't have been ranked high. So last year, Texas went into Ann Arbor and beat up on Michigan pretty good, and then came out ranked number one after that game was over because they thought Texas went in and beat a top 10 team on the road, but that didn't end up being the case. So I think really the only way you see that is this game gets away from LSU, which I think there is a chance that it could. Clemson beats up on them pretty good, looks very dominant in doing so because the defensive line overwhelms LSU's offensive line. Cade looks sharp. Garrett Riley overwhelms Baker's system, and you see Clemson win a game like 38-17. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to stay close, and Clemson wins a close, high-scoring game by 3 points.
I agree with you on the second-year coordinator, step up there. I think that's a huge thing with them. I think that you're going to see that with D'Anton Lynn at USC this season. You obviously saw that Jim Knowles at Ohio State. I think you're going to continue to see stuff like that in college football because it is such a step forward for your coordinator, getting used to the players getting used to the scheme. However, my problem with Blake Baker is he has, even when he was at Missouri, I never really saw him go up in these big ranked matchups and really take away an offense. I think that there is a lot of validity to the fact that the defense could be better. Obviously, I said that they are going to be better, but I just question what that's going to look like with Garrett Riley. Last year against ranked teams, they averaged 33 points against the LSU defense, and I believe the year before that, ranked teams against Blake Baker averaged over 40 points against them. So a key for LSU's defense here is going to be to keep Clemson under 30 points. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening, and so I have to go with Clemson here, winning this one 35-31. I think Garrett Nussmeier will struggle in the pocket. I think that he's most likely going to have a key turnover or two late in the game, and that's going to set up Clemson's offense to just continue to keep putting more points up there, but it will remain a close game because LSU will keep it close and have the offense to be able to stay in the game.
I do think that the second year coordinator thing matters, but I typically tend to lean on a team that has more guys who can do things to affect you. And especially defensively, LSU is going to need Whit Weeks to play like the game of his life, which he could do because he's a very good player. But I went through the list before. Clemson's got Peter Woods. Clemson's got TJ Parker. Clemson's got Sammy Brown. Clemson on the back end has Avion Terrell. They've got 4 or 5 or 6 guys who can make game-changing plays on defense, whether it is forcing a fumble, whether it's forcing Nussmeier to throw a bad pass. And I just think that Clemson has too many guys on that side of the ball to really let the game get away. I also, while I do like some of the pickups that LSU made in the portal on defense, I don't know that they have the defensive horses to stay with Clemson's receivers. I think it's going to be a very entertaining game for about 3 quarters. I think that Clemson will at some point assert control and wins 35-27.
Nice. I probably am going to recuse myself from making a specific score prediction because I can see it in the 30s, maybe low 40s, although 40s is pretty rare now with the new clock rules, but I like it somewhere between probably 10 to 3 points in favor of Clemson. And I believe that when you look at, Blake Miller and Tristan Lay compared to LSU's offensive tackles, that's a huge edge. And Clemson has the much better defensive line. Clemson also has Wade Woodaz and Sammy Brown coming back, so they have their own type of potentially freakish linebackers who, not saying they're the best in the world. I think that Texas, Ohio State is probably better there along with maybe some other teams, but they're pretty good. I am scared by what Bald Father is saying about the closeness of the game in the sense that in my brain says that Clemson is probably going to take this thing over pretty quickly, and it's going to be too much for a new O-line on the road at night. But I've seen Clemson play these SEC teams, and they respectfully kind of fold up like a lawn chair. And as their talent has gotten worse, that means that their, depth talent wise is a little bit shakier. I don't think that'll come to fruition this year because they're so old. They have staff continuity. They're well developed. They've made staff upgrades. There, I think, is a world where LSU goes in and they have the 6th most talented roster per 24/7 Sports. Clemson now is the 8th. So technically, from a purely only looking at recruiting profile standpoint, LSU actually has the better roster. It's very close, though. There is a world where I think LSU can come in and win, and everyone raves about Nussmeier's arm, and he has Barry and Brown and Nick Anderson, who's coming back from injury. So I'm going to be a little bit conservative and go more with intuition and say that Clemson wins, but it's going to be close and exciting. Now let's look at Notre Dame and Miami. Sunday night, 7:30 p.m. on ABC. Notre Dame, 2.5-point favorite, just under 3. Your thoughts?
Yeah. So line. Line initially was Notre Dame -3. It was at -3 for quite a bit of time, and then made a pretty big jump. Well, in betting terms, it's only a half point, but 3 to 2.5 is very, very significant in the betting world. So it went from 3 to 2.5 around this summer, ended and went into fall. It's a game where you have a lot of the just a general thought process is Notre Dame will win based on the physicality profile of Notre Dame going up against what people perceive as a lack of physicality profile, especially on the Miami defense. We are on Miami +3 at Bald Feather Bets. We actually like it a lot. There's a couple of things with this one, and I'm going to touch on one that has nothing to do with football. It has to do with weather. So everyone in the wintertime and around the college football playoff love to talk about the warm weather teams going up to play cold weather. Well, this is August, early September, and we're going down to Miami, the southernmost part of the continental United States. It's projected to be in the 90s, and it's projected to have humidity up into the 70 and 80%. That's a shock for people who live in Indiana. And you look at traditionally when teams from the north have gone to Miami around this time of year, it hits them pretty hard. They get a lot of cramping injuries. They're not quite used to it. It takes the wind out of their sails come third and fourth quarter. I am one of the people who's buying into some of the Miami defensive improvements. I hope that doesn't come back to bite me. But I do think some of what they did with regards to overhauling the secondary is real. I am a little bit concerned with Miami's wide receiver core, but from everything you hear from camp intel is that those guys have been good. I'm also someone who is, I will say, a little bit more medium of the road on Carson Beck. People seem to have just thrown this guy in the trash, and he was the projected Heisman favorite, projected round 1 pick 1 coming out of an end of the year next year, and he played with maybe one of the worst wide receiver cores I've seen at a top 5 team in a long time. Drop passes. He played in Mike Bobo's scheme. He played with Georgia offensive linemen who were just missing assignments all over the place. Like, I think this guy's a little bit better than what we're giving him credit for. I like him at home over CJ Carr actually quite a bit. I don't think it's a good sign that the Notre Dame QB race went so far into the camp. But on the Notre Dame side, I think an absolute non-negotiable with them is Notre Dame checked every box for me when it comes to offensive line last year. Guys just kept going down, and they kept performing on the offensive line. So I do think that I don't care how good of a defensive line Miami puts out there, I do think Notre Dame will have that advantage. I think they will be able to run the ball with Love and Price. And so no matter what, I think Notre Dame, if you can establish the run and you can have that, you'll keep the game within reach. I think Notre Dame will be leading at multiple points. I just kind of like Miami at home in this one, and I like what they've done in the portal and to clean up some of the stuff. And I do give Cristobal more credit, I think, than some people do. Yes, he's made some bad in-game decisions, but if you look at the overall coaching profile of Mario Cristobal, he's a pretty damn good coach.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go with this one because to me, I like Miami a whole lot more in this game. Carson Beck, I think, had a rough year last year with a bad wide receiver core. That was hard for him, but that's kind of what happens. Like that just shows how important Brock Bowers was 2 years ago at Georgia, and he really struggled with trying to get things going there without any real threatening targets for them. And in this one as well, the Miami offensive line, I think is gonna, I wouldn't say have their way, but I think there's a pretty good advantage that Miami has there over the Notre Dame defensive line. Notre Dame struggled to stop the run in the playoffs a few times last year, and they were able to do some creative things, run some creative stuff to, outside of the running game to try and keep things more even. And obviously, being able to run the ball on offense, control the clock, stuff like that helps a lot. And I think that's where Notre Dame is going to have to go in this one. This is going to have to be a Marcus Freeman, just absolute show of coaching, and not to embarrass Cristobal or anything else like that, because I do think he gets underrated as a coach. However, I do think Marcus Freeman was so good with his coaching last year in the playoffs, and that's going to have to continue. I do think the Notre Dame offensive line is going to be able to block well for Jeremiah Love, Price. I think those guys are going to do a good job, but that's really their avenue to winning this game. Leonard Moore has to be fantastic on the outside, going up against JoJo Trader, CJ Daniels, those kind of guys. And, it's going to have to be one of those games where Notre Dame kind of keeps it low scoring, controls the clock, frustrates Miami with trying to get them off the field and then holding on to the ball. If they can do that, I think Notre Dame is going to win this game. But if you look at it from matchups and talent and stuff like that, I think Miami has the edge here. It's just going to have to be the coaching of Notre Dame that saves them in this one, in my opinion.
I think that it is the coaching battle is definitely real. Marcus Freeman obviously did a great job last season. Cristobal has had his share of on-field gaffes. I'm not as high on him as a lot of people are, and I find it interesting. I think they said today he's actually coaching from the box, and I don't know exactly what that is about. I don't know that I've heard of a head coach coaching from the box unless they've been sick, like Joe Paterno was up there one time. But that to me is an odd move. The other thing that you have to look at, yeah, Carson Beck has the experience edge over CJ Carr. He's been in big situations before. CJ Carr is new, but what is the best thing you can give a young quarterback? An offensive line that can protect and a running game. Notre Dame has both of those. The offensive line, I think, can handle Miami's front, and I think that Love and Price are going to do their thing. But the other thing is, I think Notre Dame has upgraded their receivers quite a bit. Getting Malachi Fields as a transfer, I think, is going to help a lot. Jaden Greathouse kind of made a name for himself against Ohio State. He had a couple of touchdown catches. So I don't think Notre Dame's receiving core is as pedestrian as maybe people think it is. And CJ Carr, while certainly not the runner that Riley Leonard was, meaning defenses aren't going to have to account for him just tucking the ball and running, he's got better arm talent than Riley Leonard. So I think that if Miami does take away the running game, I think there is another facet that they can go to. So I actually think that Notre Dame on the road is going to feel pretty comfortable, because really the only place they're not experienced other than the front line of the defensive line is at quarterback. All the other guys are experienced, and they can kind of hold CJ Carr's hand until he gets comfortable.
I really like what Baldfather touched on in regards to the weather, and really what everyone, Baldfather, John, and Mike have touched on with the O-line. I mean, I think it is one of the best offensive lines in football, and it very well could be the best. And I think that Joe Rudolph certainly deserves his flowers for the way that he has coached and recruited ever since his days at Wisconsin, when in hindsight, maybe he was more the reason Wisconsin was what it was under Christ, and not the other way around, along with Jim Leonard, of course. I think that Miami at home with an experienced quarterback in Beck, and with a defense that I think has revamped the secondary, but they also returned Ruben Bain on the D line. Bud Elliott on the Cover 3 podcast was mentioning how staffs were raving about David Blay. their incoming transfer defensive tackle. And while Miami doesn't have a lot of depth there, I would assume that that could be a problem, but certainly not in week 1 when you have all those guys healthy. Not as much as it could be down the stretch if you suffer injuries. The public is on Notre Dame from what I see in a very similar way they're on Texas over Ohio State. And I get it because Freeman last year did a much better job coaching than Cristobal when they arguably, I think, had pretty similar levels of talent. Notre Dame more defensively. Miami had that, electric offense, and Miami couldn't figure out defense. And Notre Dame did what they could on offense to get just enough points to win games and play for the national championship. I think that in this matchup, Notre Dame has to go on the road. That's a minus. I also think that Miami is the better overall team at this point. That would be another minus. That has to do with quarterback. It has to do with the fact that I think Maui Goa is the best offensive tackle. And I don't exactly know from the Notre Dame angle of things whether Joshua Burnham or Botello or Tui Halamaka are good enough to consistently pressure Beck. I mean, Beck should have better receivers. He should have at least an equivalent tight end to what he did last year. He should have a much better running back room and a better offensive line and better play calling. Everything around him should be better than where it was at Georgia. And while I don't love the Miami receivers, I think that they are good enough to exploit something about Notre Dame that a lot of people forget. And that is that against USC and Ohio State, the best passing offenses they played by a mile, they gave up an average of 34.5 points. And they have a coordinator change, probably a downgrade from Golden to Ash. So I like Miami a lot. I don't know if I'd pick them to win by double digits, but I certainly think they'll cover, and I certainly think they'll win outright. And I think that they will look like the better team. I'm high on Notre Dame in the long run with Freeman. I think he's certainly an upgrade to Kelly. He's recruiting at a level Kelly could never. Right now, out recruiting Ohio State, Oregon, like recruiting with Alabama, with Georgia. But I think this year's a little bit of a valley in between the mountaintop. They lost a good chunk of players. They relied on turnovers last year, and they faced a lot of offenses that just couldn't exploit their defense and how it operated. I think Miami's one of those teams that potentially could. So I'd go with the Canes.
So, Vic, and then just final thoughts on the game. You took my piece, Sam. The Notre Dame passing defense. So Sam and I talked about this all year last year. Out of any unit last year that was considered really good, I thought the absolute most fraudulent thing was Notre Dame's defense. I do not, and I'm going to say this with a caveat, outside of Leonard Moore. I think Leonard Moore is one of the best cover corners I've ever seen. I thought that about him when he was coming up in high school ball in Texas. I thought he was the best cornerback I'd ever seen come up through high school ball in Texas. And I think he's the best cornerback in college football. I think he's does everything well. Zone, man, he's smart, play recognition, all that. So outside of him, I think Notre Dame's defense was very fraudulent last year. And I think Miami has the exact kind of team profile that you would need to exploit it a little bit like USC did towards the end of the year, a little bit like Ohio State did. And I think Notre Dame got very lucky in their run to the national championship and that they played essentially three teams that lacked the ability to have any sort of passing offense against them in Indiana, Georgia with a backup quarterback, and then Penn State, who the four of us could play wide receiver for last year. So I don't really like Notre Dame's ability here in this game. So Sam, I will say it. I have Miami by double digits. I have Miami 31 to 17 in this game. I think it will be close early for the things that Mike touched on with regards to Notre Dame's offensive line and running game being able to really establish themselves because I don't think what Miami did on defense will be able to take that away early. But then when the game gets tight and they're having to rely on CJ, it's deep, it's late into the third, it's into the fourth quarter, they're getting tired. I think you'll see Miami pull away with some key plays. And I think you'll leave saying that game was closer than the final score indicated. But I think that final score will get above double digits. And then I think everyone will be very much so overvaluing Miami and very much so undervaluing Notre Dame as we move into the next weeks.
I would love to have a hot take in this one and talk about how Notre Dame's going to get the win and all this stuff and everything. And while I do really like Marcus Freeman, and I am honestly going to be rooting for Notre Dame in this one, as I said earlier, I think Miami's the better team, and even with the better, the coaching advantage that Notre Dame has, I think that coaching can do a lot for you, but it only gets you so far when the other team just plain has better players. And I'm not trying to disrespect Notre Dame's wide receivers or anything like that. I do think they have more of a deficiency at tight end this year than we've seen in a long time at Notre Dame. However, I just think that there's too much on this Miami defense. Everything that Notre Dame seems to have going for them, Miami seems to have a counter for. My only thing that I could see kind of getting in the way and Notre Dame taking this one is if Corey Heatherman is just kind of in over his head in this one. He's had a very quick rise to this defensive coordinator position at Miami. Does he run into some issues going against Notre Dame? I mean, Mike Denbrock is a really, really good offensive coordinator. I think you can trust a young quarterback more when you have an offensive coordinator like Denbrock, his history at LSU, now at Notre Dame. I think that in this one, I'm going to pick Miami to win it, but I'm not super confident in it. I'm confident that they're the better team. I'm confident that they have better players, but because of the coaching in Notre Dame, I'm gonna pick. Are we doing score predictions right now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I couldn't remember. I'm going to pick Miami to win this one. I'm going to go 28-20 for Notre Dame, but I could easily see this one, Notre Dame scoring 20 points and Miami only getting 17, or Notre Dame scoring 24 and Miami only getting 21 or something like that. So, but my big pick will be 28-20 in favor of Miami.
All right. Well, it sounds like I may be a man on an island here. I'm going to go contrary in that while top to bottom roster, Miami may be better, other than quarterback and maybe defensive line, there's not a unit on Miami that's better than Notre Dame's unit. I think that Carson Beck's fine. I mean, he's not bad. For people who are saying he's trash, they're high. He's not trash, but I also don't think he is great either. My question comes down to he has been in big games before, so he's not going to get rattled by the circumstance by any means. But you've got Leonard Moore. You've got Christian Gray, who I like a lot. He's not as good as Leonard Moore, but he is good. Devonta Smith is a pretty good nickel. I think that Aiden Schuler is a guy to watch. I think Notre Dame's back seven is pretty good. I do think their defensive line can be exploited, but I don't think Miami's running backs are great. I don't think Miami's receivers are great. And I just think that Notre Dame in certain areas are going to be able to take things away. And I think Notre Dame has more ways to score that if for whatever reason Love and Price can't get going running, I think that with Greathouse and Malachi Fields and Jordan Faison, I think that there are enough weapons for CJ Carr as long as he's not getting like just overwhelmed by the blitz. I think that he's going to be able to make throws. I think Notre Dame wins fairly comfortably, 28-17.
I love the difference of opinion. Love it. Something to bring up is, you touched on it, Mike, is how maybe Miami can stop Notre Dame's rushing attack, but then Notre Dame can, maybe go over the top or complete some passes. And to a certain degree, that's what they did in the playoffs against Penn State and Ohio State, because Penn State ate them. Like Penn State basically took them like a piece of gum, chewed them up and spit them out of their mouth. I mean, Penn State ran for 200 yards, 5 yards per carry, and Notre Dame couldn't do anything. But through Jaden Greathouse breaking away and Leonard being able to be somewhat comfortable after halftime, they were able to come back. That was also part of why they came back against Ohio State. But I also think Ohio State had a little bit to do with that too. They could have made that a 50-7 game had things gone another way. I'm going Miami, and I'll go with them to win by Yeah, I'll go with them to win by 10, say. Wanted to say 17, but maybe that'd be a bit too, I think that's a bit too excessive. So I'll go with 10. I think that Notre Dame will, as they should, they have the better running back group, and they're probably better overall in the offensive line. Should run better. I wouldn't be shocked, just given the nature of what I've seen Notre Dame's rushing attack schematically and how a lot of it's explosive. Whereas Miami last year, it felt like they were more, put your head down and just get through. I wouldn't be shocked if in situations when you need power running, it wouldn't shock me at all if Miami's more successful there. And then pairing that with the inexperienced quarterback and Carr, that's an area where, how much are you going to rely on him coming off of injury last year? So it's not like he was healthy last year, could play in mop-up duty, or could practice all that much. He was hurt. So I think there's just a lot of things that go Miami's way, but I can see Notre Dame winning. Absolutely. In the team talent composite, Notre Dame's actually fairly ahead of Miami, which shocked me. And they also have Marcus Freeman versus Cristobal. And another thing to pay attention to before we move on is Miami getting Bert Auburn. If he plays to his potential, what he showcased at Texas in 2023, I don't know if Miami or if Notre Dame has a kicker that can match that. So that could be something situationally that benefits Miami too. Do we have time to go over some games with brevity, of course, but some smaller games, or no?
Sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay. So,
By the way, you had to throw Bert Auburn in there. You had to remind me of that. I appreciate that.
oh my gosh.
God.
Yeah.
God.
If Texas had him, I probably shouldn't be saying this because it's probably giving you PTSD, but they definitely win that SEC championship game if they have him. Like Georgia had in the first half, I remember watching that and thinking they are getting destroyed, not line of scrimmage wise, but Texas was just, kind of finding ways to walk all over them creatively. And I think that shows that Sark is undervalued by some as a coach, but Georgia did what Georgia does, and they hang around. Let's see what interesting games there are. So with brevity, I guess we can go over Nebraska, Cincy, maybe a minute each, Alabama, Florida State, and then Virginia Tech, South Carolina. Shorter per people, but I think that'll be fun. So let's start again with you, Bald Father. Nebraska, Cincy.
Nebraska, Cincy, line 7 down to 6.5. No one can understand why. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, Nebraska's going to come out and kill them. I, for one, am dreading the pregame show where they show Dylan Raiola and doing his pregame warm-up, and then they show Patrick Mahomes doing his pregame warm-up because they're playing at the Kansas City Chiefs Stadium, and they show his haircut, and they show all the stuff that he does. And at that point, I think a lot of America is going to hate bet Cincinnati over Nebraska. No, but in all seriousness, so we like Cincinnati plus the 7. It's not high units or anything like that. It's mainly just Nebraska's over under win total 7.5, and people are acting like it's a shoo-in that they're going to win 9 or 10 games and complete for the playoff. And there's a reason that the sports books have them at 7.5 and haven't come off the number. I have some questions about Nebraska in terms of, does Raiola take that next step? If he doesn't, then the perceived top advantage that Nebraska has in this game, which is their passing attack over Cincinnati's pass defense, may not be there. And then I have some questions about Nebraska's interior defensive line against the run game. It's not like Cincinnati has an overwhelming offensive line or anything, but they're also not terrible there. I think Cincinnati's passing attack, I think coaching, offensive coordinator, and QB are a little bit undervalued in this. And I see Nebraska winning a game that they get a win, but Nebraska fans are kind of leaving there scratching their head going, ooh, I don't know if we should have been so high on this team coming in. But I think the fact that it's a neutral site game that will be nothing but a neutral site game, it'll be mainly Nebraska fans, I think that'll play into a factor. And I think Nebraska gets a win that's a little bit closer than they would like.
So my question is, if they're going to show Patrick Mahomes next to, Dylan Raiola, is Heinrich Harburg like going to get engaged like Sabrina Carpenter or something like at some point? I mean, they're really trying to put all this together here, so we need to see that happen, I suppose, as well. But no, I actually completely agree with everything you said, Baldfather. Those were kind of my keys to the game as well. The defensive line for Nebraska, they're going to have to be able to stop the run in this game. I do think that John Butler has talked a lot about aggression with his defense. Now, this is also talking points you get from any new defensive coordinator most of the time, so, take it as you will. But I am concerned if Nebraska does try to get too aggressive, because Brendan Sorsby does have those legs that's going to be able to hurt the Nebraska defense if they get out of their contain or if they over pursue and then he gets loose and goes on a long run or two or something like that. And I think that could be a major factor in this game. I agree. Nebraska's not going to win by as many as I think some Nebraska fans think. Now, I have a lot of Nebraska fans that watch our channel. Some think, Cincinnati's just going to get absolutely killed, and some think that Cincinnati actually has a chance in winning this one, and they're quite concerned. So, Nebraska fans, from my experience with talking to them, are kind of all over the place here, but I do think this is one that Nebraska fans need to be prepared for, that Cincinnati's going to give you a good game. I'm concerned about this Nebraska defense this year. I love the addition of Dana Holgorsen. I love Dylan Raiola in his second year. I think that's going to be really, really good for them. The wide receiving core, everything else. I think as long as Emmett Johnson stays healthy, you're going to have a good running attack there, an improved offensive line. So I think we're going to see a high-scoring Nebraska offense this year, and I think that's going to play in their favor against Cincinnati. But being able to contain Brendan Sorsby, if Cincinnati is able to run the ball and kind of keep the ball out of the hands of Nebraska's offense, that's going to be key. But I do have Nebraska winning this one 31-27. Could possibly see Nebraska score a little bit more, but a major factor here is going to be Brendan Sorsby using his legs or not.
I agree to a point that Cincinnati has a puncher's chance just because of Sorsby. They do have a pretty solid 1-2 punch at running back with Tawi Walker, who came in. Evan Pryor showed some last year. And a guy that is getting overlooked, that may be one of the better tight ends in the Big 12, is Joe Royer. And I think that Sorsby is going to lean on him a lot. Like you, I don't love Nebraska's defense. I think that they're sometimes too aggressive, and I think that leaves some holes where Cincinnati's going to be able to exploit. The only problem is, outside of Dante Corleone, who maybe has the best all-time name for a defensive lineman. I mean, that he's going to cash in on anything that you do. He's going to make you pay because his name is Dante Corleone. But I do think that Raiola, because of Dana Holgorsen being there, I think Raiola is going to be able to make the jump. I like getting Dane Key. I like getting Neziah Hunter. I do like the fact that in year 3 that Matt Rule's teams always take a jump. They may not win 10, but I would be shocked if they don't pretty easily get past 7. I know that the guys out in Vegas make a lot of money because they know what they're talking about, but barring injuries to really key important players, I don't see how Nebraska doesn't win 9 games, and I don't see how they don't win this one fairly comfortably. I think they score late to make it look like it's more of a blowout than it is, but I think Nebraska wins 31-17 with a late touchdown to provide kind of a false margin.
So this was one of the games that I was the most excited to preview for the whole season, because I thought that while Cincinnati was the inferior team, that they're a Big 12 team. They had a lot of bad injuries last year and brought a lot of those players back. So it was fascinating. In this matchup, with how much Nebraska loses on the D-line, I mean, so they lost their best tackles, so Nash Hutmacher and Ty Robinson. They also lost Princewell Unman-Malin, brother of Princely, who was a standout at Ole Miss. They lost him to, Ole Miss. They lost Jamari Butler to LSU. and James Williams to Florida State. They run a 3-3-5, and they lost 5 defensive linemen. Their current defensive line, if anyone's watching, correct me if I'm wrong, but based on the depth chart that I saw today from our lads, only one of their 4 two-deep defensive tackles, nose tackle and D tackle in the 3-3-5, are over 300 pounds. Now, size doesn't mean everything, but Cincinnati has Evan Senegal on the interior O-line, who I think is an all Big 12 caliber player. They have a nice 1-2 punch at running back, and Sorsby is mobile, and I remember watching him at Indiana and a bit last year. He's not bad. I would say he's good. And you add on top that Joe Royer is an X factor here. 6'5", had 500 receiving yards last year. Most of Nebraska's linebackers, I know Marquise Watson-Trent's an all Sun Belt player, but he's 5'11". Wright's, I think, the only one that length and size-wise is pretty comparable. I wonder if Nebraska, with some issues they've had at secondary in the past, with some of the new transfer pieces up front, could struggle to cover him. And also there's the angle of, I think, with Dante Corleone and what Cincinnati brings back on the offensive line in parts, I think that in the beginning of the game, Cincinnati is going to be clearly winning up front. And that's going to make people say, oh, I didn't expect that. But Nebraska's skill position talent and I think superior coaching staff, I don't trust Scott Satterfield to win anything at all. I at least trust Rule to beat an unranked team. Hasn't beaten a ranked team yet. And as someone who has Nebraska winning 9 or 10 games, I think that the path for this team to get there is winning a lot of close games. And I think with some of the coaching staff upgrades, the new special teams coach, if John Hole emerges, that's an interesting battle here. Is John Hole, Nebraska's kicker, who had some ups and downs, against Steven Rusnak of Cincinnati, who was perfect at Charlotte last year. I'm picking Nebraska to win. I would probably say 24-20. I think that Nebraska just gets more touchdowns than Cincy because of their better athletes and better overall players. We can now move on to Alabama and Florida State, and you have the floor, Bald Father.
You did make me laugh, though, that tomorrow night I'm going to be sitting there watching that game going, man, I actually bet on Scott Satterfield here to win this game. So, yeah. As a contrarian bettor, it's interesting because you're right often more than you're wrong, but when you're wrong, you're so wrong, and the public just kills you. So Florida State and Alabama, and on my theme of being a contrarian bettor, you guys may know where I'm going with this one. So line came out at 12.5, was quickly bet up to 13.5, and then had a weird point in time where it actually came down to around 11.5. Makes no sense, right? Alabama's team talent composite, like the number 1 team in the country. A lot of people having them win the national title. Florida State went 2-10 last year. There's a couple of things here that I'm looking at as to, and I'm going to take the Josh Pate approach. When you have a line this big, how could one team keep it a little bit closer? So Florida State, I like a lot what they did on the defensive line in terms of what they brought in. Actually, a little too much. I went down a rabbit hole and I was like, you're liking this a little bit too much than you should. And I like a lot the Castellanos and Gus Malzahn pairing, especially early on in the season when he still has fresh legs and he's not dinged up and he hasn't been hurt yet. With that being said, ultimately, I think Alabama has too much in this game for them. I think the talent edge on Alabama, especially in the secondary, at some point, yes, Gus Malzahn's going to have to call a pass play, and Florida State's going to have to get some downfield passing going to win. And I don't think they're really going to be able to against that Alabama secondary. I think Alabama has the best secondary in the country. I think a lot of people aren't really understanding quite maybe how good it could be if everything comes to fruition for them. I think Ryan Grubb on the offensive side will clean up a lot of the inefficiencies they had last year, will hide the issues that Ty Simpson had that maybe is why he hasn't been able to win that job up until now. Obviously, there's something that he is lacking if he wasn't able to quite take it last year away from Milroe, given how Milroe struggled. But I do think this one, again, we haven't given out the pick officially, but we will here soon. We like Florida State plus 14. in this one. It's a lot of points for a home game in Tallahassee, where they're going to have a lot of juice coming off of a year where they have put everything into this game. You can kind of hear it in the coaching staff's voice. You can hear it in Norvell. It's not that desperation the way you hear out of some of coaching staff's voice in that last year. It is no, we went to work and we're putting this in. Ultimately, do I think Florida State has a season that redeems them, that their fans like? Probably not up to the standard that they have. But coming off a 2-10, you should be happy if you go 7-5 or 8-4. But I think in this game, you're going to see a lot of fight. I think you're going to see a lot of improvement. The team will not have quit on them by game one, which is what everyone has in their mind from last season when Florida State quit by essentially the last 5 games. So I like Florida State to keep this one within 14 points, but ultimately I just think Alabama's too much for them.
I think you make a lot of good points, Baldfather. I think that Alabama, obviously the more talented team in this one, and I like what, bringing Ryan Grubb back. I think that's huge for Alabama to do that. You just saw the pairing of DeBoer and Grubb time and time again at Washington and other places, and it's just been such a big thing for him. I think probably one of the best offensive coordinator hires in the nation this past year, if not the best. I think Dana Holgorsen is probably up there as well, but we'll have to see how that goes before we can truly grade that overall. But it does give me some concern with Ty Simpson. I do think the Florida State secondary is pretty weak, so I feel pretty confident in Alabama's ability to throw the ball around out there. I think Ryan Williams is somebody that doesn't get talked about, enough at times. He's kind of up there with Jeremiah Smith, and Jeremiah Smith gets all the love as he should. But in this one, I've not heard the discussion of Ryan Williams as much as I think there should be. I think that he could absolutely dominate and have a monster game in this one. As much as I don't think Florida State is going to let Alabama come in and just dominate and blow them out in the opening game, if I'm just looking at it for this game, I think that's probably what happens. My co-host Zach said that this was his SEC upset of the week, and I tried to entertain it with him a little bit, and I saw where he was coming at a little bit with some certain things, but Kalen DeBoer had an off year last year. Kalen DeBoer is still a really good coach. I don't really, I'm not super fond of him, but if I'm looking at it objectively, he's a really good coach. Him and Ryan Grubb are a great combination together. And I think Alabama offensive line, quarterback, with what they've been able to do with him, Ryan Williams, and I think the defense, secondary of Alabama is also good. Keon Sabb, guys like that back there. I think Alabama's probably going to take this one. I think they're probably going to cover 31-14.
I'm not going to get too cute here. I think Alabama wins the game, but I'm kind of with Baldfather a little bit. I think that the way that Norvell and his staff have been approaching this, they've thrown last year in the trash can and say, we can't go back and do anything to change that. Let's focus on this year. They have upgraded their receiving core. They got Squirrel White from Tennessee. They got Deuce Robinson from USC. Castellanos in at quarterback. Roydale Williams, who started his career at Alabama, is going to be one of the lead backs. I think Florida State's offensive line is actually pretty solid. Their problem was that they were just really, really bad against the run last season defensively. They did go out and make some pickups. I like Elijah Herring at linebacker that they got. I don't know, like for Alabama's offense, they're kind of like Ohio State. Ty Simpson is the Julian Sayin role. Jam Miller's injury, I think, actually hurts them quite a bit. Richard Young, I know, had a lot of publicity when he was in high school. He was a 5-star guy, but he didn't even really get on the field much last year. I mean, really mostly in mop-up role. Is he going to be able to take on more of a featured role? Also, Tim Keenan, it was just announced today, he's going to have surgery on the defensive line, and he is a really vital piece on their defensive line, just kind of plugging stuff up and being able to, I guess, kind of wreak some havoc. Him being out for a couple of games, that might open. I mean, Castellanos has some legs, and I think that they're going to play to his strengths. Alabama's going to win. I don't think they cover. I think it's going to be something like 30-21. I think Florida State is going to be a little more impressive than people think they are, and ultimately will have a fairly solid season, 7 wins, 8 wins. I think they keep this one respectable and a 9-10 point loss.
That is a nice nugget of information about Tim Keenan, because he's their best defensive tackle by a mile. And for as much as some people have pointed out, like, again, the Alabama-Ohio State comparison, some have pointed out, understandably so, that Larry Johnson with Ohio State, like, he hasn't produced the same D-lines that he used to. And it's fair. But they've still been elite and at times and have produced, all their defensive linemen just got drafted. Alabama's recruited at a very high level on the D-line. And maybe I'm wrong here, but it seems like their biggest difference makers, even in the final Saban years on D line, were more like edges or outside linebackers. I don't think they've had a high hit rate on their defensive line, and against a Florida State offensive line that should be respectable, and with a mobile quarterback at home, and also thinking about Alabama's offensive line's really good. It should improve as the season goes on. And Milroe didn't do them any favors. And the line is a ton of, I know that Bald Father Betts, for example, is in love with Alabama's offensive line, and it makes sense. They're very talented. However, they were inconsistent at times last year. They lost probably their best player from last year in Tyler Booker. And per PFF, they were 47th in pass blocking efficiency. Now, that's probably a bit low, because PFF does a very bad job of adjusting for strength of schedule, I've discovered, which is a shame. But I imagine that Florida State has enough pieces up front, so James Williams at D end or Darrell Jackson Jr. at D tackle, to where I don't think they'll beat Alabama's O-line, but I think they'll hold up better than some might think. And with two players such as Miller and then Keenan being out, those are big losses. So I think Alabama will win, but with that news, the D tackle news, I think, is much more critical than the running back news. So with that, I would probably put Alabama on maybe a slight upset watch and take them like 27-20, something along that range. And then last but not least, before we get out of here, the other Sunday game, Virginia Tech and South Carolina. South Carolina is ranked 13th, coming off a very strong year, and Virginia Tech was kind of a disaster last year relative to what the public thought of them. But South Carolina is only a 7.5-point favorite. What are your thoughts?
Line. So line came out at 8.5, and it's just been bet down since then. So it went to 8, and now it's at 7.5. I've already given this one out. We have it at 8.5. I like it anywhere down to, we have Virginia Tech plus 8.5. I like it anywhere down to Virginia Tech plus 7. So a couple of things here. So Virginia Tech, I think there's a chance that people are a little early on them. I know I still like Drones. I don't actually hate what they have at the coaching staff. I think people might have been a year early on Virginia Tech. I don't have them as an ACC dark horse by any means, but I absolutely have them as someone who can have a good season in the ACC. But this is more to do with South Carolina. So South Carolina, for as much as love as Lenora Sellers got, the reason South Carolina was so good is they had one of the most dominant defensive lines in all of college football. And don't be wrong, Dylan Stewart is phenomenal, but the defensive line wasn't just Dylan Stewart, and they lost quite a bit of production off of that side. I believe that the upside of Lenora Sellers is the best upside of any quarterback in college football, but I still need to see it a little bit more with regards to the passing attack, and I'm not 100% sold on what South Carolina has in terms of wide receiver. I want to think that they've made improvement there and that they're good, but I'm just not sold on what they have at wide receiver. And so if it is a lot more of that option attack of Sellers in the run game with their running backs, then there's again going to be a little bit limited, and they don't have that Superman to lean on, which is the defensive line. They have an individual Superman to lean on the defensive line, that is Dylan Stewart, but the unit as a whole isn't going to be in that same category that maybe them and Ole Miss were last year in terms of a dominant defensive line. So with that being said, I like Virginia Tech and to make the cover and the points here. I think it's also a little bit of a sloppy game in terms of that, because I don't necessarily love either of these passing attacks, but I do like the option run game and the QB run game from both teams. I will give the lean and the edge to South Carolina being able to get a win, just because I think Sellers can make so many just freak athlete type plays that there's maybe him and maybe DJ Lagway can make in terms of at the quarterback position. I like DJ a lot more because he can throw the deep ball, but that I think is the difference. I think it gives South Carolina a close win. And then another one where I think maybe after this game, people are like, maybe we should pump the brakes on the South Carolina hype heading into the year.
I'm right there with you, Bald Father. I think this is one where Virginia Tech is going to cover. I think that it's going to be a closer game than some people anticipate. See some people saying, oh, Lenore Sellers, Dylan Stewart, they got all these really good players, and they're just going to kind of dominate this game. And don't get me wrong, Brian Thomas Jr., he's really good on the edge as well, but South Carolina did lose, some linebackers, some interior defensive linemen, and I'm concerned about some of their depth and their experience in their front seven there. Virginia Tech might actually have some good success running the ball in this one. I can see this being one where both quarterbacks are kind of running around like crazy, trying to make a lot of different plays with their legs. I think that both South Carolina and Virginia Tech, I'm not super sold on either one's wide receiver core. I think Nick Harbor obviously is going to be a red zone threat. He's huge for he's just huge in general as well. Was he like 6'5", 230 or something like that? He's just huge in general. But he's not really displayed the ability to be that number one guy yet. So they're going to be relying on him to do that this season. I think last year he had less than 400 receiving yards. So can he be that guy for Lenora Sellers? I think when they get down to the red zone, it's going to be better for South Carolina, but I have some concerns with them being able to move the ball down the field if Lenora Sellers has not developed as, more of a kind of on-time type of passer. Very, very good playmaker. He's exciting to watch. I really like him in that case, but with kind of being on time, delivering the ball in an area for players to be able to make plays on the outside, I have some concerns there. But I do go with South Carolina. I think they're the more talented team. Not super in love with Shane Beamer. I think he gets a little bit too much hype sometimes, but I do think that South Carolina is going to pull this one out. You'll probably see, I'm going to go with 24, let's say 24-20, 24-17, something like that.
Virginia Tech is a team that really did not play up to its talent. I think if you look at their roster, they should have been a lot better last year. I put a lot of that on Brent Pry. I don't think he adjusted very well when the injuries happened. Having Drones miss some time certainly stagnated things. But if you look at their roster, they're going to have a little more punch in the running game, getting Terry and Stewart from Bowling Green. I saw him play a little bit last year because I was so in love with Harold Fannin Jr. that when they ran the ball, Terry and Stewart was a guy who flashed. So I like him. Donovan Green from Wake Forest. He's a guy, I actually think their receiving core is pretty solid. And on defense, I think that getting Ben Bell, he's a guy who who kind of maybe snuck through a lot of folks because he came from Texas State, but he's a guy who can really create some problems for a South Carolina offensive line that is Josiah Thompson and a lot of other guys. I think if they line him up on the side opposite Josiah Thompson, I think he can have some success. I'm with you. I think that Lenora Sellers is dynamic. I don't think he's always consistent with the passing game. One thing that does help South Carolina, just the other day, they got word that Razul Faison is going to be eligible and is going to be able to play. That's going to help their running game a lot because he is an established back and he can take some of the pressure off of Sellers. Ultimately, I think South Carolina wins. I wouldn't be shocked if they need a fourth quarter score to win the game. South Carolina 26-23.
Yeah, I think that the point that has been made about the defensive line losing a lot, Baldfather, and then JR and Mike, I think that I would liken it to what I think Penn State's defensive line is going to be this year, a little bit of the opposite, though. So South Carolina brings back their best player, but loses their, most of the role players from last year, most of the starters. And Penn State loses their best player on the D line, Abdul Carter, but I think they return enough role players and have a coaching upgrade to where it'll probably be a D line that, I don't know if I want to say it's better because Carter was just that good, but there will be aspects of it that I think will be a better unit, especially I think in some of the big games they'll play in. I think they're better at D tackle. But anyway,
Zane Durant's really good.
Yes. But anyway, enough of me with my love of Penn State. I should shut up. It scares me how high I am on them. It terrifies me because I have been on record before saying that James Franklin is who he is. But anyway, about South Carolina and Virginia Tech, I am going to be the contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian because I haven't picked this game. I haven't even made a prediction video for it. Just haven't had the time. I'm going to go with Tech pulling off the upset because A, someone has to lose, and I'm not really picking any of the favorites to lose. And B, South Carolina's O-line has never been a strong point of theirs, and based on the preview and research I've done, there's no reason why it's going to be that way again this year. They lost a ton at linebacker. The D-line's been the talking point, and that's understandable. That was the best unit, but they also lost a lot at linebacker. Basically, what they return is Dylan Stewart, pieces of their secondary, their quarterback. They got some nice transfers, Faison included. But I think that Tech, being an underdog here, having drones, I confess that I don't know a ton about their roster. But based on what everyone here is saying, I'm going to go based on some of the wisdom of the ball knowers, and I think pick Virginia Tech to earn a win here. Not saying they're going to be this amazing team, because I don't think they will be, but it's an interesting spot, and Beamer also has this history of playing down to competition and then playing up to the big teams. Alabama last year, Clemson, he has a 2-game win streak against him on the road when playing in Death Valley. And they also typically, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like they start off pretty slow. And then as the year goes on, they really begin to pick up speed. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I'll just close this out here, and then we'll talk for a few seconds behind the scenes. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell. Before we close this out, let the people know where they can find you on all of your accounts.
Yep, I'm still just on YouTube, but channel name is my name, just Baldfather space bets. I do picks for NFL and college football. So we have a 4-year track record of having positive units. The last year is the first year that I went public with it, but all those picks are public from last year, and we were positive. I think over 200 units. So always do everything in units. Everything's always about the spread. Also give some analysis on the games. Yeah, feel free to come by, check me out, give me a subscribe. And we have picks for every NFL game and every big college game that you would want to have a pick for.
Yeah, you can check me out over at the Big Ten Huddle. Me, my co-host Zach, and my other co-host Jeff. We cover every single Big Ten team over there, and we talk other national college football stuff and things like that at times, but really our focus is every single Big Ten team. So if you like the Big Ten football, if you like Big Ten basketball, come check us out. There's a football channel, the Big Ten Huddle-football, and there's a basketball channel, the Big Ten Huddle-basketball as well. Follow us on Twitter, X, whatever you call it, TikTok, all those places as well. Thanks for having me, Sam.
And I am I do college football focus. I take a national perspective on all of the games. Obviously, grew up an Ohio State fan. I'm actually covering Ohio State this year for a paper up in Cleveland. But I am at CFF M. Waxman spelled as you see it on the screen. I am on Facebook. I am on Twitter. Also have a YouTube, CFB Focus. Have the podcast there, and it's also an audio podcast on Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music, all those places. So anytime you want to find me, CFF M. Waxman. Thanks a lot, Sam.
Of course. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will catch you next Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time.